In this crazy world, it's so hard to unwind. So I'm taking time just for me. Gonna find my peace, let my soul be free. In the quiet moments, that's where I'll find a little room to breathe, leave it all behind. Give me room to breathe, I need some time to heal my heart, to clear my mind. Gonna love myself, yeah, I believe in the power of me. Just give me room to breathe.
Great new day to all my self-care friends and family. Welcome back to another Room to Breathe podcast. I am your host, Life Coach 614, and I am so thankful and grateful that you've made space to be here with us today. Now, before we jump into today's episode, I need for everyone to do me a quick favor. If you're feeling the vibes, go ahead and show us some love. Tap the screen, like, comment, but most importantly, I need for you all to share this out with someone who could use a little healing energy today. And if this is your first time here or you haven't done so already, go ahead, hit that follow button. Subscribe to our channel so that way you are always tapped in when a new episode drops. I also want to invite you to visit our digital home at theselfcareclub.org. There you will find everything you need from affirmative apparel to motivational merch, as well as a ton of free resources to help nourish your growth and remind you that you are supported every step of the way. Just know that you don't have to do this alone. We are healing in community, growing one breath, one moment, one day at a time. So today, I encourage you to give yourself permission to pause, to make space for peace, for growth, but most importantly, room for you. And remember, if anything in today's episode hits home, be sure to drop those green hearts in the chat. That is our community's way of saying, I am healing, I am growing, and I am showing up for me. Now, let's get ready to breathe, reflect, and grow together. Now, family, today, we're going to have a conversation about expectations. And, more than expectations, I want to talk about something that we should not expect, right? It's just simple that we should not expect to heal in the same places that hurt us, right? And so we have to begin to understand that not everybody's going to clap for our healing. Matter of fact, some of the people closest to you will feel personally attacked the moment that you stop participating in the dysfunction that they call normal. And that realization right there can break your heart if you're not prepared for it. Because a lot of what we grew up believing, that family automatically equals safety, that blood automatically equals support, that, if we finally healed or communicated better, set our boundaries, got therapy, chose peace, stopped self-abandoning and started loving ourselves correctly, that the people around us would celebrate that. But healing has a way of exposing relationships that are only functional when you're struggling. See, people are comfortable with the version of you that they can predict, right? The version of you that tolerates disrespect, the version of you that stays quiet just to keep the peace, the version of you that keeps showing up exhausted, the version that overextends, overgives, overexplains, and overfunctions for everybody while silently falling apart. But the moment that you start changing, the moment that you stop answering every phone call, the moment that you stop volunteering yourself for emotional labor, the moment that you stop allowing guilt to control your decisions, right? Or even the moment that you start saying, no, that hurt me. No, I'm not doing that anymore. No, access is no longer automatic. Suddenly people start acting like you changed the family dynamic. Welcome in, Jordan. Right? But no, you didn't change the family dynamic. You just stopped carrying it by yourself. And, one thing about generational curses, they survive through normalization, right? The curse survives when nobody questions the behavior. when everybody keeps pretending, when accountability gets labeled as disrespect, when trauma gets pursed down like as a personality, when silence becomes tradition, when survival mode becomes identity, when people would rather protect the image of the family than actually the well-being of the people inside the family. And can I just say something that might make a few people uncomfortable? Some people don't actually want healing. They want familiarity. Even when it's toxic, even when it's draining, even when it's destroying everybody involved. Some people, just crave the dysfunction because dysfunction becomes comfortable when it's all you've known, right? Gwenny, welcome in. Because see, while everybody else is trying to maintain the pattern, you and your healing journey, you're trying to disrupt it. You're trying to interrupt it, right? You're trying to learn healthy communication after growing up in chaos. You're trying to learn boundaries after being taught guilt. You're trying to learn emotional regulation after growing up around emotional explosions or emotional absence. You're trying to become soft in places that forced you to harden. And let's be real, that work is exhausting, especially when the people should have protected you and they're the ones that are often offended by your healing. Especially when the people who taught you survival don't understand your peace. Especially when your healing requires grieving people who are still alive. And I know somebody who is listening to this right now, tired, right? Tired of being called too sensitive for acknowledging the pain. Tired of being labeled as distant because you started protecting your energy. Tired of carrying family wounds that were never yours to begin with. Tired of trying to explain your boundaries to people committed to misunderstanding them. But I want you to hear me carefully today. You're not wrong for wanting better. You're not wrong for choosing peace over chaos. You're not wrong for refusing to normalize suffering. You're not wrong for deciding that trauma stops traveling through you. Elevated Awakening Z, welcome back, Don. Somebody in the bloodline has to be brave enough to say, this ends with me. Even if they don't understand it, even if they resist it, even if they talk about you while you heal. Because sometimes breaking generational curses means becoming the villain in the stories told by the people who have benefited from your silence. And that's a very heavy truth. So today we're talking about the loneliness of healing, the grief that comes with outgrowing dysfunction, the guilt of choosing yourself, and the strength that it takes to become the person who finally says no more. So I want to start things off by talking about how some families normalize survival, but not healing. A lot of us were raised by people who knew how to survive, but they never knew how to heal. And before we go further, I want to acknowledge something. Survival kept many of our families alive, right? Some of our parents and grandparents endured things that we can't even fully imagine, right? Poverty, addiction, violence, racism, neglect, abandonment, unprocessed grief, emotional suppression, constant instability, right? Some people were in survival mode for so long that they never even got the opportunity to ask themselves, what do I feel? Or what do I actually need? What does peace even look like for me? So this conversation is not about shaming our previous generations, but it is about telling the truth about what happens when survival becomes the family culture instead of a temporary response to a hardship. Because survival mode changes people, right? In survival mode, you don't rest, you collapse. You don't communicate, you react. You don't process emotions, you suppress them. You don't heal wounds, you learn how to function through them. And eventually, dysfunction starts looking normal, right? It starts to become an everyday thing. Now, yelling is considered passion. Silence is considered strength. People pleasing is considered respect. Overworking is considered responsibility. Emotional neglect becomes, well, at least they provided. That unresolved trauma becomes, that's just how they are. Some families never learned emotional safety, only emotional endurance. Thank you, Mr. T. Some families never learned emotional safety. You know, some people become experts at pretending, right? Pretending that they're okay. Pretending that things didn't hurt. Pretending abuse wasn't bad. Pretty girl, welcome back. Pretending toxic behavior is love because it's the only version of love that they've ever experienced. And I mean, if we're being honest, a lot of us have inherited coping mechanisms disguised as personality traits. Hyper-independence, trust issues, anger, emotional shutdowns, people-pleasing, difficulty resting, fear of vulnerability, always feeling responsible for everybody else, feeling guilty for having your own needs. Some of us weren't raised to feel safe. We were raised to to survive discomfort quietly. That's why healing can feel so foreign, because when you grow up in survival mode, peace can actually feel uncomfortable at first. Some people don't know, what to do in healthy environments because chaos is their normal. That's why some people sabotage healthy relationships or feel anxious when things are calm or constantly expect something bad to happen. They struggle to trust kindness or even feel guilty for resting. It's like their nervous system got conditioned to survival. And listen, you can't heal, what your family normalized if you refuse to acknowledge it. And see, that's the hard part, because some families would rather maintain an image than to address the damage that is being done. They will say things like, we don't talk about family business. Just let it go. That happened years ago. You're too sensitive. Stop bringing up the past. Meanwhile, the past is still living in everybody's body, still showing up in relationships and parenting and how we communicate and the addiction, the anxiety, still showing up in how people love and how people fight. And the cycle continues because nobody feels safe enough to tell the truth. But that's why the cycle breaker is often labeled as the problem. Not because they're wrong, but because they're disrupting that generational denial. You become the difficult one when you start asking questions that nobody else wanted to ask, right? When you start asking, why was this normalized? Why were children expected to emotionally care for adults? Why was disrespect excused? Why was silence rewarded? Why did everybody protect the dysfunction instead of the people being hurt? And those questions, when you ask them, it makes people uncomfortable, right? Welcome in, Aisha. Because healing requires honesty, and honesty threatens systems that are built on avoidance. Some people would rather keep peace artificially than to confront the painful truth authentically. But I want to tell you something. Peace that is built on silence is not peace, it is suppression. And eventually suppressed pain leaks into everything. That's why some families can gather together every holiday and still feel emotionally disconnected. It's like everybody's smiling for pictures while privately carrying resentment and trauma and grief and jealousy and anger, disappointment, just emotional exhaustion. Because survival has taught them how to function together, but not how to heal together. And maybe you're listening to this right now and you're the person in your family that's trying to do something different, right? Maybe you're the first person in your family to go to therapy. Maybe you're the first to set boundaries. Maybe you're the first to apologize to your kids. The first to choose softness instead of survival mode. The first learning emotional regulation. The first person to actually say, no, that hurt me. And I want you to know, if that is you, if you're that person, I want you to know that that takes courage, because it is easier to normalize pain than heal it. It is easier to stay familiar than evolve. It is easier to call dysfunction tradition rather than admitting that it caused damage. But healing asks you to tell the truth, even when the truth disrupts other people's comfort. And that's the kind of honesty, that changes bloodlines. I also want to take a moment to talk about the family role that you were assigned. One thing that people don't talk about enough is how families quietly assign roles to people. And the wild part is most of us didn't even realize that we were performing a role until healing made us exhausted by it. Because in dysfunctional environments, everybody adapts somehow. Somebody becomes the caretaker. Somebody becomes the peacemaker. We've got the overachievers, the invisible, right? The comedian who keeps everybody laughing through the pain. We've got the emotional dumping ground, the scapegoat who gets blamed for everything. And y'all know somebody got to be the strong one. And listen, once that role gets assigned to you long enough, people stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a function. Right? They stop asking you how you doing, because they've grown so comfortable with, what you provide emotionally. The strong one is expected to always hold it together. The responsible one is expected to fix everything. Thanks, Cynthia. The forgiving one is expected to keep giving chances. The quiet one is expected to tolerate mistreatment and disrespect. The successful one is expected to save everybody. And that nurturing one is expected to emotionally carry the entire family. Yeah. And, if you've spent your whole life being praised for what you provide instead of who you are, healing can feel confusing. Because now you're trying to figure it out. You're trying to figure out, who am I outside of survival? Who am I outside of responsibility? Who am I when I stop performing? And a lot of cycle breakers are actually people who got tired of being emotional, right? Of being the emotionally used one and then being called strong. Let's talk about that, because being the strong one sounds flattering until you realize that people only come to you when they need something. They expect you to understand everybody else while nobody understands you. They expect you to keep showing up while privately drowning. They expect grace from you while giving very little back. And if you're finally, if you finally admit that you're overwhelmed, people get uncomfortable, because your suffering was convenient as long as you stay silent. That's why some families panic when you start changing. Not because your healing is wrong, but because your healing disrupts the role that they've assigned you. See, Dysfunctional systems depend on predictability. Everybody unconsciously learns their position. Know your role. Because, baby, listen. Free Bird, welcome in, sis. The fixers fix. The caretaker nurtures. The peacemaker avoids conflict. The scapegoat accepts and absorbs the blame. The emotionally mature child becomes the parent. The people pleaser sacrifices themselves to keep everybody comfortable. And the moment that somebody says, I don't want this role anymore, that whole system shakes. Now people start saying all that shit. You change. You acting funny. You think you too good now. Or you don't even care about this family anymore. But that's not the case. We're just tired of carrying emotional responsibilities that were never ours to carry. Some of y'all were children trying to emotionally stabilize grown adults. And because you learned early that your value came from what you could do for people, you developed identities around overfunctioning. You've become hyper independent because nobody consistently shows up for you. You became emotionally mature too early because chaos forced you to adapt. You learned how to read rooms and monitor moods and avoid conflict and anticipate emotional explosions before you even fully understood yourself. That's not maturity. That's survival. A lot of strong people are actually deeply exhausted people who never felt safe enough to fall apart. That's why healing feels so emotional sometimes. Because you start to realize I was loved more for what I provided than who I actually was. And that realization, if we're being honest, hurts. Because some people truly only know how to relate to you through the role that you play in their life. The helper, the giver, the dependable one, the one who says yes to everything, the one who absorbs everybody else's problem, or the one who keeps showing up no matter how drained they are, no matter how many times they are neglected or abused or disrespected. And see, once you stop performing your role, some relationships fall apart immediately. Not because you became difficult, but because the relationship was built around you abandoning yourself. And just let that sit for a moment. Was a relationship that was built upon self-abandonment even worth it? Some connections only survive when one person is overextending themselves emotionally. So when you begin healing, resting, or setting boundaries, protecting your energy, or even just prioritizing yourself, the people who benefited from your lack of boundaries experience your growth as a form of rejection. And honestly, that's why healing can feel so lonely at first. Because you start seeing how many relationships were built around access instead of reciprocity. You realize that some people only knew how to take from you, but never learned how to care for you properly. And if we're being real, some families reward unhealthy roles, right? The child who suppresses emotions get called the easy one. The child who overachieves gets celebrated while they're silently burnt out. The child who speaks up gets labeled as dramatic or disrespectful. The child who questions dysfunction becomes the problem. Meanwhile, the actual dysfunction stays untouched. That's why so many cycle breakers feel isolated. Because healing often means disappointing expectations people had over your suffering. Butterfly, welcome in. People expected you to stay accessible, agreeable, emotionally available. They expect you to stay responsible for everybody else's comfort. And now that you're choosing yourself, now that you're resting and saying no. Welcome in, Roxy. Now that you're no longer over explaining your boundaries and that you're recognizing the manipulation, you're asking for a reciprocity. Now you're protecting your peace. Some people genuinely don't know how to interact with the healed version of you because they only learned how to engage with the survival version of you. Thank you so much, Miss Cynthia. But I want you guys to hear me carefully today. You're allowed. You are allowed. Do you hear me? You are allowed to outgrow roles that required your self-destruction. You are allowed to stop parenting grown adults emotionally. You are allowed to stop carrying everybody else's healing on your back. You are allowed to exist outside of your usefulness. And maybe the most radical thing a cycle breaker can do is stop performing survival long enough to discover who they actually are underneath it. Yes, allowed. You are allowed to. Because you were never created to just carry everybody else's pain. You deserve softness too. You deserve support too. You deserve rest too. You deserve to be seen as a human being, not just the role that people assign you. But we have to understand that healing will expose who benefits from your brokenness. Healing changes your vision. And I don't just mean spiritually or emotionally. I mean healing changes what you can no longer ignore. Because once you start becoming self-aware, you begin to notice things that you cannot excuse. You notice manipulation that you once called love. You notice inconsistency that you once said, well, they're just busy, right? You notice the emotional neglect that you once minimized because at least they showed up physically. You notice how often you abandon yourself trying to keep other relationships alive. And that realization honestly will piss you off. It will make you angry. Not just at other people sometimes, but at yourself for how long you've tolerated things that hurt you. A lot of us tolerated dysfunction because dysfunction was familiar. Right? So if chaos was normalized while you were growing up, peace can initially feel suspicious. If inconsistency was normalized, then that bare minimum effort can feel like love. That's why healing matters, right? Because healing teaches you how to recognize what you should have never felt, the things that never should have felt normal in the first place. And once your eyes are open, some relationships start feeling very different. Because healing exposes who truly loves you and who only loved access to you. See, some people benefited from your brokenness. And that's something that not a lot of us want to admit nor talk about. Right? The people who benefit from our brokenness. And it's not intentionally all the time. Sometimes it's not maliciously, but reality is still reality. Some people benefited from your low self-esteem because it made you easier for them to control. Some people benefited from your people pleasing because you rarely said no. Some people benefited from your fear of abandonment because it meant that you tolerate things that you shouldn't have. Some people benefit from your trauma because it made you overcompensate for love. Some people benefited from your lack of boundaries because you stayed emotionally available no matter how drained you were. And the moment that you start healing, their access starts to change. So now suddenly you're hard to deal with because you ask questions. You require consistency. You notice patterns. You stop over explaining. You stop begging for the bare minimum effort, right? You stop trying to convince people to value you correctly. And I mean, let's really talk about it, right? Some people get uncomfortable when you stop accepting the breadcrumbs. We not sitting out here like, more porridge, please. Right? Because healing forces you to meet people differently. Now your standards are changing. Now your energy is changing. Now your tolerance level is changing. Your emotional availability is changing. And when people who were comfortable with the old version of you, they may struggle with that healed version of you. Because healed people require accountability, right? A healed version of you notices that manipulation quicker. The healed version of you stops romanticizing this struggle love. A healed version of you doesn't confuse inconsistency with mystery. A healed version of you no longer tolerates being emotionally drained in the name of loyalty. And honestly, some relationships survive off of your lack of self-worth. And I know that is heavy, but think about it, right? Thank you so much. Think about it. Some people were only comfortable around the version of you that never challenged them, never confronted behavior, never asked for reciprocity. As long as you stayed small enough, the relationship worked. As long as you stayed exhausted, the relationship worked. As long as you kept abandoning yourself to maintain access to them, the relationship worked. But healing changes that agreement. And sometimes people get angry because your healing removes privileges they once had access to. Now they can't guilt trip you as easy, right? They can't manipulate your empathy the same way. Now they can't trauma dump on you endlessly without reciprocity. They can't weaponize your kindness against you. And instead of respecting your growth, some people will try to humble you back into dysfunction, right? Let's talk about that. Because people will say things like, oh, you think you're better than everybody. And statements like that are really code for, I no longer have the same access to your energy. Because people who benefited from your brokenness often experience your healing as a form of abandonment to them. Not because you actually abandoned them, but because you stopped abandoning yourself. See, that distinction matters. And I mean, if we're honest, a lot of cycle breakers struggle with guilt because they confuse boundaries with betrayal. Especially if you were raised to prioritize everybody else's comfort over your own well-being. So now boundaries feel mean, right? Every no feels selfish. Every act of self-protection feels like guilt. Meanwhile, the people who drained you sleep perfectly fine while you're over here suffering. And see, healing exposes the fact that not everybody wants to grow. Some people genuinely prefer familiar dysfunction over uncomfortable healing, because healing requires that accountability, honesty. It requires grieving and self-reflection. And so some people would rather protect their ego than to confront their patterns. That's why you cannot force healing onto people. You can love them. You can pray for them, encourage them, model growth for them, but you cannot heal people committed to misunderstanding themselves. And I think that one of the hardest parts of becoming emotionally healthy is accepting the fact that everybody cannot go where you're going. Some people are only fit for your survival season, not your healing season. Some people were assigned to this chapter, right? The chapter where you were still shrinking, still settling, still tolerating, still disconnected from yourself. But once you evolve, that connection no longer aligns, and that hurts. Because grief doesn't only happen through death. Sometimes grief happens through awareness, right? The awareness that you outgrew relationships built on dysfunction. Bella, welcome back. Awareness that some people only love the convenient version of you. Awareness that some people liked your wounds better than your boundaries. And that truth can make you want to go backwards just to feel that connection again. but don't you do it. Do not shrink your healing to maintain access to people who are committed to misunderstanding your growth. Do not betray yourself just because your boundaries inconvenience people. Do not return to dysfunction because healing feels lonely. Lonely healing is still healthier than crowded dysfunction. I want to say that again. Lonely healing is still healthier than crowded dysfunction. And sometimes healing sometimes healing means accepting that people who benefited from your pain may never fully celebrate your freedom from it. And as painful as it is also clarifying. Because once you see it clearly, you stop begging for love from spaces that only know how to consume you. That's where the real healing begins. And there is this guilt that will come from choosing yourself. Let's just talk about it for a second. Because a lot of cycle breakers feel guilty for healing. Green hearts in the chat if you've ever felt guilty for your healing. Guilty for resting. Guilty for setting boundaries. Guilty for moving differently. Guilty for wanting peace. Guilty for saying, I don't want a life like this anymore. Especially in communities where struggle has been normalized, we feel guilty. Some people will make you feel bad for wanting softness, for wanting stability or emotional safety, for wanting reciprocity instead of survival relationships. Somewhere along the way, many of us were taught that choosing ourselves meant abandoning everybody else, right? We were taught that rest was lazy. We were taught that boundaries are disrespectful, that constantly sacrificing yourself was good, right? That's what good people do. So now, even when you're exhausted, you still feel the pressure to show up, to fix, to help, to save, to overextend. And that guilt runs deep when your identity has been built around being needed. Because if your value has been, tied to what you could do for people, healing can feel like you're losing your purpose. Now you're trying to figure it out. You're trying to figure out, what if I'm not constantly, who am I? I'll say it like this. Who am I if I'm not constantly rescuing everybody? Who am I if I stop overgiving? Who am I if I choose peace over proving myself? A lot of cycle breakers secretly feel uncomfortable for receiving. And I'm talking about like receiving help, receiving rest, receiving healthy love, receiving support without earning it through suffering at first. Because survival mode teaches people that love must be worked for, that rest must be deserved, right? That worthiness becomes a sacrifice, or worthiness comes through our sacrifice. So when your healing starts teaching you that you don't have to suffer to deserve care, that's why it's like your nervous system almost rejects it, right? Like that's why some people start to self-sabotage peaceful seasons, because chaos feels familiar. That stillness that you feel in the peaceful season feels suspicious. Sometimes guilt keeps people trapped in unhealthy family dynamics for years, right? People stay accessible to dysfunction because they feel responsible for everybody else's emotions. They stay in toxic environments because they don't want to disappoint people, or they continue healthy patterns because the guilt has convinced them that self-sacrifice equals love. Meanwhile, they're just silently drowning. Healing forces you to confront that difference, right? Even when it hurts. Because choosing yourself often requires disappointing people who benefited from your self-neglect. Again, understand that some people are only comfortable with the version of you that has no boundaries. Have an amazing day, Cynthia. Thank you so much for being here. But like that healed version of you, the rested version, the version that requires balance and reciprocity and respect and mutual effort. See, some people experience that version as rejection because they were used to that unlimited access of you. But I want you to know that choosing yourself is not betrayal. Wanting peace does not make you selfish. Wanting love does not make you weak. Wanting boundaries doesn't make you disrespectful. You are allowed to stop inheriting pain as your personality trait. You are allowed to choose a life that feels emotionally safe instead of emotionally familiar. When people say you've changed, I want you to start asking yourself a deeper question. Wasn't that the point? Right? It's like now when I hear people say you changed, I'm like, I hope so. Because why would I go through all of this pain, reflection, therapy, crying, praying, journaling, right? Releasing, rebuilding, just to stay the same? So when they tell me I've changed, I'm like, yeah, I mean, growth should change you. Healing should change you. Boundaries should change your availability, and self-respect should change your tolerance level. So yeah, when you say I've changed, shouldn't I? And let's talk about why they really get uncomfortable, right? Your growth forces people to interact with a version of you that they can no longer control, predict, or emotionally consume in the same way. See, the old version of you tolerated too much, stayed too long, explained too much, forgave too quickly, ignored red flags, overextended, overgave, right? Stayed accessible even when they were exhausted. And because people got used to that version of you, your healing is now inconvenient for them. Mr. Awesome, welcome in, bro. Suddenly, you're not answering immediately because you're out here protecting your peace and questioning patterns. You're not volunteering yourself for chaos anymore. You're no longer shrinking to keep relationships comfortable. And see, people who benefited from your lack of boundaries will almost always notice your growth before they celebrate it. See, some people don't actually miss you. They miss the version of you that was easy for them to access. The version that didn't challenge anything. The version that tolerated emotional breadcrumbs. The version that accepted inconsistency because you were afraid to lose people. But see, healing changes your standards. Now you want honesty, consistency, reciprocity, peace, effort, communication, emotional safety. And see, people who are committed to remaining emotionally immature often become irritated by emotionally healthy expectations. That's why, they start accusing you of, changing, when really it's just grief it's grief disguised as criticism. Because your healing is disrupting a dynamic that people have grown comfortable with. And sometimes people only support growth when it still benefits them. It's like they'll cheer for your healing as long as it doesn't require boundaries. as long as it doesn't challenge unhealthy patterns, as long as it doesn't reduce their access to you. But the moment that your growth starts changing the relationship dynamic, that support starts to get a little shaky, right? Because now you're being distant or too serious, too sensitive, too independent, too hard to approach. Meanwhile, you're just tired. You're just tired of carrying the relationship by yourself. In fact, you're starting to realize that I've been carrying this relationship by myself, so I might as well be by myself. Tired of being emotionally available for everybody while privately neglecting yourself. Tired of performing survival instead of actually living. Healing has a way of making you protective over your peace because you finally realize how expensive your suffering was. Some of y'all have lost years trying to earn love from people who were just committed to misunderstanding you. Some of y'all normalize emotional exhaustion because dysfunction was familiar. So now that you're healing, of course you're moving differently, right? Because you've learned that access to you is not automatic. Thank you for the follow. You've learned that not everybody deserves your, intimate access, or they don't deserve intimate access to your energy. You've learned that protecting your peace is not selfish, that it is necessary. Because we are tired of repeating patterns. We are tired of abandoning ourselves, tired of normalizing things that damage us emotionally. And see, that's not arrogance, it is awareness. And awareness changes everything. Because now, you notice that manipulation quicker. You recognize emotional inconsistency faster. You stop making excuses for people who continuously harm you while demanding your loyalty. And see, that level of clarity changes relationships fast. Some people will drift away because they no longer benefit, right? Some people will resent you because your healing reminds them of what they avoid confronting in themselves. And some people simply won't even recognize you anymore because survival shaped one version of you, but healing is introducing another. And honestly, that's okay. You're not obligated to remain the same just because people got comfortable with your brokenness. You're allowed to evolve, to mature, to outgrow patterns that once felt normal. You are allowed to become someone that your younger self desperately needed. So yeah, you've changed. You changed because pain has taught you what you no longer deserve. You changed because healing has demanded honesty. You changed because survival was exhausting. You changed because the old version of you was carrying too much. And that change may be the very thing that changes your life. We also have to understand that while we are on this healing journey, there comes a point when you are going to grieve people who are still alive. And I think that this is one of the deepest forms of grief that there is, because sometimes breaking generational curses means grieving people who are still here. Grieving the mother that you needed but you didn't have. Grieving the father who couldn't emotionally show up. The family dynamic you wish existed. The support you thought would come, or even the apology that you may never receive. And that hurts. Because a lot of, cycle breakers aren't just healing from what happened. They're also healing from what didn't happen. Right? The affection, the protection, the emotional safety, the encouragement, the gentleness, or the consistency. And sometimes the hardest part of healing is accepting that some people may never become who you needed them to be. Not because you're unworthy, but because they may not have the capacity to do so. And see, that truth can break your heart and free you at the same time. We have to become the safe space that we never had. You know, one of the things that I've noticed about cycle breakers is that they often become what they needed the most. You know, that realization is both beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time, because many people who are deeply intentional about love, communication, softness, and emotional safety learn those things through the pain of not actually having it consistently. The person who constantly checks on everyone else usually knows how it feels to be forgotten. The person who creates safe spaces for people to speak honestly usually knows what it feels like to be silenced. The person who reassures everybody emotionally usually knows what it feels like to navigate fear, anxiety, and abandonment alone. The gentle parent often came from harshness. The emotionally aware partner often survived emotional inconsistency. The nurturing friend often learned how painful it feels to carry everything alone. See, a lot of cycle breakers spend years becoming the kind of person that they once prayed for. That's why your healing matters more than you realize. Because when you intentionally heal, you stop reproducing pain automatically. Right? You start paying attention to your words, your reactions, your tone, your emotional patterns, your triggers, your communication, your presence. You begin asking yourself, does my love feel safe? Do people feel seen around me? Am I responding from healing or unprocessed pain? Am I creating peace or recreating survival? And let's be honest, that level of self-awareness is exhausting sometimes, right? Because your healing doesn't just teach you to recognize what hurts you, it also forces you to confront the ways that that pain has shaped you, right? Because that's the humbling part of healing. Real healing isn't just saying they hurt me. It's also saying, how do I make sure that I don't bleed onto other people because of what happened to me? And that takes courage, because it's easy to repeat what you were shown. It is harder to pause and choose differently in real time, especially when your nervous system was trained through chaos. Some of y'all are still actively teaching yourselves emotional regulation while simultaneously trying to parent children, to maintain relationships, build businesses, survive burnout, and heal trauma that you never asked for. And that's heavy. And I really need cycle breakers to just give themselves more credit. Because people see the boundary, but they don't see the internal battle that it took to set it. People see the calm response, but they don't see the years that it took to stop reacting from survival mode. People see the softness, but they don't see how hard that you fought to become, how far you fought to not become bitter. Some of y'all have had every reason to become cold, every reason to become emotionally unavailable, every reason to stop trusting people completely. But instead, you chose awareness. You chose growth. You chose reflection. You chose to try again. You chose to love differently than what you experienced. And that matters, especially because generational healing often happens in ordinary moments that nobody applauds. It happens when you recognize, or let's say, it happens when you apologize to your child instead of defending your ego. When you communicate instead of shutting down. When instead of proving your worth through exhaustion, or you rest, right? You rest instead of proving your worth through exhaustion. You stop yelling because you recognize your own triggers. You choose honesty over image management. Or when you stop guilt tripping people because you finally learned how harmful it was when it was done to you. See, that's healing. Not perfection, not awareness, right? And I want to say something important. Becoming a safe space for others should not mean abandoning yourself again. Because sometimes healers accidentally recreate self-neglect through helping everybody else. Some people become so committed to breaking cycles that they forget that they deserve care too. And I know that I'm surrounded by a bunch of healers. So I need you guys to hear me when I say you cannot build healthy relationships while constantly draining yourself empty. You deserve softness too. You deserve understanding too. You deserve support. You deserve relationships where you don't always have to be the emotionally mature one. And honestly, I think that one of the hardest lessons that cycle breakers learn is that you can't heal everybody. You can model healing. You can inspire healing. You can create safe healing environments, but you cannot force awareness onto people committed to remaining unconscious. And, that truth hurts when you love deeply, because I think that many cycle breakers carry this, this secret hope that if they just love people enough, explain enough, help enough, sacrifice enough, right? Then everybody around them will eventually grow too. But healing doesn't work through force. Healing only works through willingness. And some people are simply not ready. That doesn't make your healing pointless. Because every single time you choose differently, you interrupt something. Every single time you communicate healthier, you interrupt something. Every single time that you choose to normalize or refuse to normalize dysfunction, you interrupt something. Every time you choose accountability over ego, you disrupt something. And even if nobody in your family says it out loud, your healing is creating a new blueprint. Your children see it. Your friends see it, right? Your community experiences it. Your relationships shift because of it. You are teaching people that love does not have to feel like fear. That communication does not have to feel like war. That boundaries don't equal abandonment. That rest is not laziness, right? That your vulnerability is not weakness. And see, that kind of healing changes generations. Because maybe nobody taught you emotional safety growing up, but through your healing, somebody after you finally will understand. At some point, every cycle breaker reaches a moment where they get tired and they just simply say, the curse stops with me. I am tired of carrying the inherited trauma, tired of normalizing dysfunction, tired of bleeding on people who didn't cut them, tired of shrinking, tired of surviving instead of living. Conquering Walls, welcome in. Thank you so much. Something inside finally breaks and says it stops here. Not perfectly, not overnight, not without grief, but intentionally and honestly. And that decision is powerful because generational healing is bigger than you, right? It is bigger than you. Every boundary you set teaches somebody else permission. Every healthy choice creates a new blueprint. Every honest conversation interrupts silence. Every moment that you choose peace over chaos changes something. Even if your family never acknowledges it, even if they misunderstand you, even if they resist your growth, you are still allowed to evolve. And sometimes being the first one to heal means being the first one brave enough to disappoint the expectations attached to dysfunction. Breaking generational curses is exhausting because you're often trying to build emotional safety with tools that nobody taught you how to use. Coach, welcome back. You are learning how to communicate differently, love differently, rest differently, parent differently, cope differently, just exist differently. And on some days that feels lonely. But I need for you to hear me clearly. Just because people don't understand your healing doesn't mean your healing is wrong. You are not difficult for wanting peace. You are not selfish for setting boundaries, and you are not disrespectful for refusing to participate in cycles that have damaged you. And honestly, stop expecting validation from the people who are committed to misunderstanding your growth. Stop trying to heal in the same place that hurt you. Some people cannot celebrate the version of you that no longer benefits their disruption, their dysfunction, right? That is not your burden to carry anymore. In fact, it never was. Your responsibility is not to keep family traditions of pain alive. Your responsibility is to become whole enough that pain stops multiplying through you. So maybe you're the first one to go to therapy. Maybe you're the first one to say no. Maybe you're the first one to apologize to your children. Maybe you're the first one to, choose peace over performance. Maybe you're the first one learning how to love without losing yourself. And all of that matters. The curse doesn't stop because everybody agrees. It stops because somebody finally got tired of calling survival normal. So let that somebody be you. Now, before we close out today, I do want to leave you all with a little love and light. As always, thank you, Celeste. As always, I want to, remind you to keep breathing through the highs, the lows, and every moment in between. I want you to keep choosing peace, even if it feels out of reach. And know that here at the Self-Care Club, you will always be seen, always valued, and always supported. So don't be afraid to take up space, speak your truth, and make a little room for you to breathe. I love each and every one of you to life. And I am praying that your day is not just amazing, but aligned, intentional, and yes, on purpose, filled with purpose. This has been another Room to Breathe podcast, and I cannot wait to connect with you all again soon. Thank you.